Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed ahead of the curve. Well, welcome to the Into podcast. Appreciate you guys joining us again today. Today joined with my counterparts, Rodney Phelps from Illinois and Derek Cottrill from Northwest Missouri. How are you guys doing?
Great, thanks.
Good, Nick.
Good, yeah. Coming up against Christmas holiday next week. Anything you guys want to add specifically from your geographies, just around the horn to start with?
I'll just say for us, winter has started fast and furious. We've got anywhere from 6 to 10 inches of snow that we've had or we have on the ground, colder than cold. Now we're supposed to get in the 40s, so we're getting moisture the way I don't like to, but we're starting to get a little moisture. We will not and did not get our December run on ammonia to finish up. So what little bit they had left, we'll have to go to spring now. But otherwise, we're into winter mode.
What about you, Derek?
Yeah, we're similar to Rodney. There's still a little bit of gas was able to go on here over the last 3 or 4 days. But we're getting to the point now, if it hasn't had gas put on, it's probably going to be next spring. Like Rodney said, getting into that winter mode. Unfortunately, there were still a couple of guys I know taking out the last few fields of corn last week. But yeah, that's pretty rare. But at this point, like Rodney said, we're gearing up for winter mode. And really right now, my focus is working with the guys on getting fertility recs and plans for next spring.
Yeah, appreciate that, Derek. Yeah, it seems like in my geography, we're all but done too. I mean, I don't, outside of somebody that's really just procrastinating, you can pretty much drive for miles and not see any fields. Good run on fall ammonia. Probably didn't put on as much as Rodney did, but we got a lot done, more than we have the last couple of years. A lot of fall herbicide sprayed. So I think everybody's in pretty good shape. There was I noticed to the west of me last week, there was a guy or two trying to put some ammonia on. So I think if we miss this rain shower around me anyways, middle of this week, we might be able to, or later this week, might be able to do something in a few pockets. But anyways, to Derek's point, yeah, people are starting to think about next year and plan for next year. That seems to be the topic right now. And so I guess hitting on that, one topic that has come up recently to us, we did a pretty big plant sampling initiative on corn this summer. And one of the takeaways, at least to me anyways, is just the lack of micronutrients in those samples. And specifically when we think about boron, we think about zinc and manganese. For all three of us, those were relatively low, some lower than others, but relatively low in general. So I thought that might be a good topic to hit on today. And I will say, I guess I'll start by also saying that micronutrients would be up towards the top of the yield pyramid. So the very first thing to start with would be soil pH. You got to get that right. And if you need lime, you need to add it. The next thing would be your macronutrients, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, potassium, and even your secondary macros like sulfur, calcium if you needed it, magnesium. But our soils around here, we tend to be super high in mag, so that's not a problem. But you got to get those right first before we focus on micronutrients. So I thought just a good way to start with, because I don't want somebody jumping ahead of step and soil pH is out of whack, but we're focusing on zinc or manganese. Like, you got to go through the steps, and step 1, then step 2, and then step 3. So with that said, I guess I want to start a little bit with boron. And Derek, I might throw it to you just to start with, as far as what do we think about with boron in the soil? How do we attack that from a fertility plan if we want to attack boron? Because I know it's a little different than some other nutrients out there.
Yeah, I think with boron, and I guess remember, macro and micro doesn't mean important and unimportant. It simply has to do with the amount that is needed. So boron is a micronutrient, but simply because it's not needed near the amounts that say are NP and K and calcium and mag are. But I guess one thing about it, it's a highly leachable nutrient. Um, Very similar, similar to nitrate or sulfate, sulfur, things like that. It's going to be a leachable nutrient. Well, with our leachable nutrients, take nitrogen, sulfur, for example, we know that those are best applied with split applications over time. Timeliness when the plant needs it is going to be key. And so with that one, with boron, I would just advise if you have a yield goal that calls for a certain amount of boron and you're making your plan this winter, I wouldn't plan on putting that total requirement out up front or even in two shots. So boron, for example, is needed early on in the season for some developmental processes, but where it's really needed is pollen tube formation, pollen formation, flower formation during pollination. And so just note that if your yield goal calls for a certain amount, putting that out all up front, if you're on a highly leachable light soil and we get a lot of moisture, you might not have what the crop's going to demand during pollination when we really need it. So with that one, I would treat it very similar to a nitrate or nitrogen and sulfate split applications, even foliar applications at some point. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to put some out up front, even in the dry form, either pre-plant or during our vegetative stages. But I would split that up and count on getting some out during that pollination and reproductive time frame as well.
Yeah, those are good points, Derek. I think it's an interesting micronutrient from the fact that yeah, it's needed like a lot of them in the late vegetative stages, and like you said, it's needed what at the time we go to flowering, tassel, pollination time period. But it also has this late draw, really late in the season. At R4, we're taking up 25% of our boron needs still, so it's kind of interesting the way it tails out. And so I think that really lends itself to season long availability is needed. So to Derek's point, at least my experience is it seems like it does need a good shot of boron somewhere in the vegetative stages, whether that's pre-plant or right after planting, or that's side dress application. That big shock seems to help the tissue concentrations or levels of boron. But I do think, to his point, we do need to supplement that with foliar applications. And when you get that late demand at R4, that's why it might be nice to have some in there with the fungicide application. So yeah, boron's one you just got to keep attacking it. It's not very mobile in the plant, but it's very mobile in the soil. So that lends it to needing to be spoon fed throughout the season. With that said, I guess we could move from boron and then over to zinc. And so, Rodney, I think your samples that you had were relatively low in zinc. I guess what's something if someone was wanting to think about zinc or attack that from a fertility plan, what would your comments be?
So zinc is not so we just talked about boron that's mobile, moves quickly and through the soil profile. Zinc, on the other hand, does not. So in my area, we apply a lot of zinc several times of the year. Once again, Derek made the comment macro versus micro. It's easy to do that because you don't need a lot of it to make things happen. So putting some out pre-plant with dry fertilizer, putting some out in chemistry, putting some out foliar, topical are all good avenues to get zinc into the plant. Um, because even though it's a micro status, it's still very needed um, for some certain timings of the year. Corn is more responsive to zinc than soybeans. So a lot of times we treat both crops the same, but zinc, the corn crop needs zinc. Boron and zinc are kind of go hand in hand. And what's kind of ironic, one's very mobile, one's not. And so we have to treat them accordingly so that we get plant uptake of that micro.
Yeah, those are good points, Rodney. I think in my geography, you tend to see zinc deficiency, some low organic matter soils, cool and wet conditions, that early season limiting availability. It's also, biological process in terms of zinc. tied with the mycorrhiza that make phosphorus more available, also tied with zinc. And so when we limit the early season weather, the early season temperatures, and especially we combine that with cool, wet conditions, we can see, excuse me, you can see zinc limited when it, especially when it comes to corn. Like Rodney said, corn's a responsive crop. It is a lot less mobile in the soil, so yeah, we can build that up within the soil. Soil tests are relatively accurate for it. And one thing I found interesting, Dr. Dan Kaiser, University of Minnesota, I've heard him talk about lately. He started seeing a response to a really good chelated zinc product going in furrow as a starter fertilizer. Something he's been doing long term and hasn't seen as big a response until the last few years. And so that's another thing I think to be interested and noteworthy of. But yeah, zinc tends to be one of the top micronutrients we think about, especially with corn.
You
And
kind of hit on
another,
it, Nick. I'll add too. Rodney mentioned how it's not mobile, so placement is key. You mentioned the in-furrow application. I know not everybody's set up with starter on their planter and things like that, but if you are someone who uses a starter, I would make sure I had zinc in that analysis as well, because placement is going to be key.
Go ahead, Rodney. You were going to say
well,
something.
the other thing with zinc is you said it, sometimes it's not mobile in the soil, and so sometimes when we pull tests and all the testing we did, you might see lower scores, but you don't give up on it and you don't quit leaving it in the plan. It's just, we got to remember, corn plants and bean plants are living organisms, and it's like us as humans. We don't quit taking vitamins because maybe we didn't feel as good or we felt better, so we quit taking them. It's one of those situations, the plant needs zinc, and we got to make sure we keep zinc available.
Good points, guys. Yeah, that's definitely if I were thinking about micronutrients, one of the lower hanging fruits too would be zinc. Another one, maybe not quite as low hanging, would be manganese, and that's one. I don't know that everyone has a issue with manganese, but I can tell you, just doing tissue sampling in the past, and then doing this plant sampling, we tend to, at least in my geography in Missouri, we tend to see it with weather extremes. So if we're way too wet early, or if we turn off really soil conditions turn off really dry later in the season, you're bound to see a manganese deficiency. So that moisture can limit its uptake too much or not enough. Also, we're going to see it on high pH soils too, manganese deficiencies. And there's other pieces, things that come into play too. If we have nutrient imbalances, like things like calcium or magnesium or iron, that can limit manganese availability too. It it is not, soil test is not real accurate or real reliable, you might say, for manganese. So it's not like something that we can manage with soil test either. There might be some out there better than others, but the standard soil test for manganese has not been super reliable. My thing is, if you want to attack a manganese fertility program, a lot of the literature would say you can't really do that from a soil applied aspect. Starter bands might have some impact for it, but a lot of the literature says foliar applications are the best. And kind of back to some of the other micronutrients we talked about, like boron, spoon feeding that throughout the season and providing it season long seems to be the best way to do that foliar. It's not, again, not one that I would focus on first. I'd focus more on zinc, on boron, but it might be one that someone wants to try to address as well. I don't know if you guys have something else you want to add on manganese.
Now, I'll say on that one, if you got really high organic matter, um, we tend to see some manganese deficiencies in those scenarios as well. High organic matter obviously is a typically a good thing, but where we're trying to push yields on high organic matter soils, supplementing some manganese somewhere in there might be a good idea, because it tends to be more deficient, or it's more common to be deficient in manganese on really high organic matter. I'm talking above, 4-5% above that. Be something to think about.
And to your point on organic matter, when you start getting in the numbers you just cited, there's a lot of the micros get tied up. I call it tied up because you just got a lot of positive, negative charges going on there that start working against you. A high organic matter soil is great soil, but there's a lot of other management that comes into that. The other thing I'll say, we've hit on boron and zinc and manganese, and there's other micros, the coppers and those out there. But I think the reason we're hitting on these is these can be help yield, and we've kind of proven that over time. And it doesn't take a lot of them to move the needle. So I don't want anybody to think we're only focusing on these micros, and there's other people out there preaching other micros. So, but be cognizant of what you're doing. And as Nick said at the start of this, if your pH isn't right, your nitrogen isn't right, your phosphorus isn't right, your potassium isn't right, you can put all the micros you want, and you're not going to get a response you're used to because the rest of the factory isn't running at full capacity.
Good. That's a really good point, Rodney. And Derek, I appreciate you adding the high organic matter thing. I guess that's one thing I don't mention or don't think about because I don't have anything that's that high. But for Rodney, for your geography, definitely would be more of a concern. And yeah, you're spot on. Let's be sure to focus on the lowest hanging fruit and work our way up. Micronutrients would be further up the chain. Well, guys, with that said, I appreciate you guys walking through the micronutrient phase of it. I guess, Rodney, there's one thing that you wanted to bring up, and I think it's a really good idea. It's just some discussion on corn hybrid selection, but it's more focused on traded versus non-GMO. You seem to be getting a little more pressure about that, so I may let you start.
Yeah, so a lot of corn decisions are probably already made or ending up talking about. But then we get to this time of year, guys are saying, all right, what about some non-GMO acres to save some money and maybe put it on a farm that is well managed and they know it. But the caution I'll throw out to all the listeners is when we go away from a traded product to non-GMO, which means we're basically just getting corn, and there's a lot of other things come with that when we say non-GMO. The first one I'll throw out is you cannot spray Roundup on that crop. And the reason I bring that up, Roundup has been the easy button for years. And so, that one right there creates a big, big, big knot in some people's program when they can't use Roundup over the top of that crop. Then let's go down the bug route. You have no protection against corn rootworm. You have no protection against earworm. You have no protection against corn borer. I could keep going. So the reason I throw that out, yes, it's cheaper up front. There are good genetics in non-GMO, so I am not saying that. But what I'm cautioning is the other plethora of things that we have to think about now on a non-GMO crop that when we have traded, we don't have to. And so all of us listening need to be cognizant, okay, if we go down that road, we just have to make sure how are we going to manage that non-GMO crop moving forward.
Yeah, those are really good points, Rodney. I always tell people that too. Like, you got to be ready to scout. You got to be ready to more intensively manage. It's to me the traded. I don't have the rootworm trouble that you do. So for us, it's more the corn borer, etc. But you have to be ready to manage that crop. I think a traded is more like an insurance policy, whereas if there's a corn borer outbreak, I don't have to worry about it. It I don't have to be quite as mindful about what's going on pest wise, et cetera. Or like to your point, you're gonna have to be more proactive with your grass control, your grass management. Yes, there's some other chemistries that we can use, but those have to be used on really small weeds, and they have a limit on when we can put them on the corn as far as a max growth stage. So you got to be mindful of that. And I would just say there's people that have been planting in my geography non-GMO for a number of years and have seen no issues. And then I can think back to several times. It seems like somewhere within my geography, somebody planted non-GMO. There's been a disaster. There's one localized disaster of corn borer here or there, almost, it seems like most every year. And as I had one guy tell me, he wasn't doing it for the premium, he was just doing it to save money. And he had done it for 10 years. And then he had 1 year where he lost 100 bushel an acre to corn borer because he wasn't on top of it. And he made the comment, I gave back my entire savings the last 10 years, that 1 year.
The other caution I'll make to all the listeners is, some operations, well, I'm not going to go 100% non-GMO. I'm still using my traded, and then I'm using non-GMO. Caution, that's fine and dandy, but if you're the custom applicator, you got to make darn sure you know where that non-GMO is versus your traded, because the sprayer's got to be cleaned out. There's just a lot of other watch outs when you intermingle non-GMO with traded. And so you got to know what your neighbor has. I will relate it back to dicamba beans versus non-dicamba beans. You got to know where your neighbors are. You got to know where yours are. So I am not downplaying that non-GMO is not a good option. All I'm calling out is there's just a lot of other management things that maybe some of us haven't, of our listeners haven't had to deal with. And so Nick and I have, and like I'll say, it's not a bad option. There's just a lot of other management things that come with it.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. There's a lot of responsibility that comes along with it. As long as you're willing to accept the responsibility, then it's no problem. You can manage it. But yeah, good points, Rodney. Well, with that said, I appreciate everybody listening today. And next time we can dive deeper into another topic, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.